Good morning. I'm glad you made it today. You know what this means because of a few people weren't able to make it because of the weather and the tornadoes. You know what it means? We all have to eat extra donuts today. All right? I'm counting on you to dig deep so that we don't have to take any home with us. So see what you can do, all right? Listen, I know when you see my wife up here on stage and you met her, maybe if you don't know her well enough, you wouldn't know it to look at her, but she's actually Colombian. She was born in Colombia, and her family's from Colombia, or to say it in her language, Colombia. And so we, of course, I've gone to Colombia to visit her family and to see where she was born. And she comes from a small town or city called Sevilla, which is in the province or the department, as they call it, of Valle de Cauca. And so it's basically a city on the top of a mountain in a valley, which is really cool. And it's super beautiful. I got a picture up here, right here. You can see from this kind of vantage point, there's the city kind of stretched out. There's even a little bit more. It's about 45,000 people, so it's not like a small city per se. But one of the things about it is it's a little less advanced than we are here, like in America. And even some of the bigger cities there, like Bogota or maybe Medellin or some of these others. And yet, it's still amazing and beautiful. So we were there visiting her grandmother. And her grandmother, see that giant church right there? She lives like around the corner from it, basically. And we were in her home. And because their construction is not quite to the level that we have it here in America, it was pouring rain. We're there in the day, and we're having a great time. The rain is coming down so heavy. I hadn't heard it come down that hard before when I was in Colombia. But all of a sudden, we hear something shift in the roof, and there was like a double roof, kind of like a sub-roof. And we hear something shift, and all of a sudden, water, we hear it coming, and then the next thing you know, it's flooding into her house. Like a waterfall, literally like a waterfall is coming into the dining room and then into this back bedroom. And I get up, I'm startled, and like, what's going on? And I look around, and they're not doing anything. So it's her abuela, her, my wife, myself, and the maid. And the maid and abuela are just kind of like walking around, doing nothing. And I'm like, Carol, shouldn't we do something? Like, it's flooding. It's pouring onto the table, onto the china set, that little cabinet. It's getting there. In the back room, it's on this top of this giant dresser. It's getting the bed soaked. I'm like, we've got to do something. And I'm like, why aren't they moving? And she says, well, if my abuela doesn't tell the maid to do anything, she won't. Because the maids are not supposed to touch anything, like go into cabinets or do anything they're not supposed to, because the owners are worried they're going to steal something. So they have strict rules. So she's like, if she doesn't tell them to do it, they're not doing anything. And I didn't know what to do. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? All of a sudden, this is not my house. This is not my culture. I don't know what's going on. But I obviously saw something inside of me. He's like, do something. And so all of a sudden, I start screaming. Toallas, that means towels. Toallas, aquí, ahora, right now, bring them. And the mop, I didn't even know how to say, mapa, I'm trying to say, get it. I'm just trying to get them going. I'm pushing furniture out of the way so it's not in the torrent that's coming down. I'm moving stuff in the back room. I get ladders. I'm all over the place. I'm like, give me this, give me that. And they slowly start getting into it. I don't know what happened. They slowly start helping me. Thank God the rain stopped and we were able to clean up everything eventually and get it done. But I was just like, my gosh, what am I supposed to do? Have you ever been in a moment where you're just like, I don't know the answer here? I don't know if I'm supposed to just sit around like them, like inspect my nails, or am I supposed to like do something? Like, what's going on? Like, and probably all of us have been there where we have these moments we're not sure what to do. And maybe something like that. It's just like an emergency. You're like, that happens like to us occasionally, right? Something happens. The kids scream in the back room. What are we going to do? Go, right? It's just like run. But then there's other times where we're doing life and we still don't know the answer. And maybe it's not an emergency, but it's something we have a question about. And this happens to me all the time with my kids. The kids come up to me, and you've experienced this. If you had kids, you've experienced this 100%. They walk up to you and they say, Daddy, can I have a snack, watch TV, fill in the blank, right? Mommy said, if it's okay with you, then it's okay to go ask you. Did they ever tell you that? And you're in your head going, did they really ask Mama? And why did Mama send them to me, right? You don't know. The truth is, in that moment, you don't know what the real answer is, do you? You're like, I'm not sure if I should say yes here. It seems harmless. They have a snack, but dinner's going to be coming. I'm not sure. Are they supposed to have a snack or not supposed to have a snack? What are we, you're thinking this, right? But Mama did send it to me. Well, I don't care. Yeah, have the snack. And then my wife walks out of the back room and says, why did you tell them they could have a snack? And I said, didn't you say to go ask Daddy, right? And she goes, well, I thought to tell them to ask you because you were going to say no. And I'm like, well, if no is what you wanted, why didn't you just tell them no? Why did you tell them to come to me? Has anyone been there? Please. All right, okay, thank you. I'm not the only crazy one up here on the stage, right? There are these moments where you don't know what the right answer is. And sometimes it's like we've all been there where we've made the wrong decision. Like my wife comes out and says, I thought you were going to say no. Well, I didn't know what the right answer was. And you're like, and then when you did it, you got like some kind of result, right? Maybe you've taken bad advice. Right? You've heard someone say something to you, you've taken the advice, and then you applied it, and you're like, I never should have listened to that person. That really messed things up. And I've done it so many times, I probably should have thought of a great illustration, because I got tons of them where I've listened to somebody and they gave me bad advice. Because we know what happens and how it turns out, right? It doesn't work out. And so we want to have the right answer. And we especially want to have the right answer when it comes to like bigger things in our life. Sometimes we're wondering like, should I take this job or not? And jobs are like a bigger deal to us a lot of times because we're going to be at that job for a while. Maybe it's even a career. So it's like, when you're first a teenager, taking a McDonald's job is not such a big deal because then you just go down the street and go to Burger King and get the job, right? Or whatever it is. But when you get into career stuff, big jobs are a lot bigger deal, right? Or maybe who should I marry? That's a big deal. That's one for life. I mean, that's one I did not want to mess up on. And I thank God I got a great wife, right? But maybe this one, maybe you're struggling in your marriage. And so the question is, how do I save my marriage? What am I supposed to do in this moment? How am I going to change what's going on here? Questions that make a huge difference in our life. Those are the ones we really want to know the answer to. And so there are times when we just want an answer. We face difficult situations. Where we take our questions, by the way, makes a huge difference. And what we do with the answer makes even a bigger difference in our life. And so I think each one of us today wants to know how to find the right answer and apply it to our life. And so today, I'm hoping through this message that we're going to learn some principles on how we can make better decisions and find better answers in our life. And so we're in this series called Immovable, Unrelenting Faith for Uncertain Times. And basically, it's a study of the book of Daniel. And so Daniel lived in very turbulent times for him. You see, he was an Israelite, so he was one of the Jew, basically. And the Babylonian Empire, which is rising to power, defeats the Jewish people. And they take a lot of the people captive in this first campaign, and they take Daniel with them back to a foreign land. So here he's in a foreign land, not even his own place. I mean, who knows? Maybe some of his family has died. He's seen some things happen. He's not very happy, I'm sure. But then he's there for a while. But not only that, while he's living in exile in Babylon, another whole kingdom comes and takes over. There was the Medes and the Persians who rise to power, take over and defeat the Babylonians. And now he's under another command while he's in exile. Can you imagine that? This poor guy going through all this turbulent times, and yet through it all, through the most difficult times, Daniel remains immovable. He remains unrelenting in his faith. And so through his story, I believe that you and I can learn a lot. And so today we're going to learn a principle that we probably already know. This is probably not something brand new to you guys, but maybe we can see it in a different light, and maybe we can see it in a way that we're going to say, you know what, this time I'm going to listen. And so this is crucial to Daniel's success, the principle we're going to learn, and it will be crucial to our success and happiness in our lives. And so we're going to start in Daniel chapter 2. And so the first thing that we see is that the King Nebuchadnezzar, has a problem. Now, I want to warn you, we're going to do a lot of reading today, okay? So just bear with me as we do the reading. And we're also going to do a little bit of studying today. And so I've got some special notes for you guys, but I hope you guys are going to learn a lot. So let's start reading. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled that his sleep left him. That's how troubled he was. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, and its interpretation. You shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. And therefore tell me the dream and its interpretation. And they answered and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. And the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of a magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Okay, long section there, right? Here's the deal. The king has this dream, and it's bothering him. And it says dream, so the indication is that he's kind of continually having this same dream over and over again. He's thinking, why am I having it? And it's distressing him. It's bothering him. So he goes, I know what I'll do. I'll go to my wise men, my astrologers, and my magicians, my sorcerers, and all these guys. And he brings them together, and he asks them the question, because he's so troubled by it. Can you tell me what is going on? Can you interpret the dream? And now he doesn't want to tell them the dream. Just tell us the dream and we'll interpret it for you. Because he's worried, I'll tell you a dream. You'll just give me an answer. You're going to lie. You're going to do whatever it takes to save your skins. So you tell me the dream, because if you can do that, then I'll know that you also know the interpretation. They're like, hey, nobody on this planet can do that. In fact, no king has ever asked that of anybody else. And so this is the first thing I'd like you to write in your outline. If you want to follow along, take that out and fill these in. It'll help the message stick. And later we've got some notes you're really going to want to fill in. There are some questions in life only God can answer. Nebuchadnezzar is faced with this problem he can't answer. And most of us, he would probably go to the world to find the answer. That's what we would do. The first thing we think of is, who knows the answer? I had this uncle, he knew everything. Like if you ever had a question, he was an engineer, he knew stuff about life, I would just come to him. I'd call him up, Uncle, what's the answer? And he would know. He was just like this magic, Google. I don't know what he was. But this guy goes to his advisors. He goes to the guys he thinks are going to know the answer. These are his wise men. We're like Daniel himself. Last week, we found out that when Daniel was taken captive, he was of the line of royalty. He was good looking. He had brains. He was really smart. He was bright. And so many of these guys in these positions were people from all over the nations they had conquered. They took the best and the brightest and they trained them and they brought them up so that they could serve the king. So think about this. When King Nebuchadnezzar asks his court of people, these people that he gathers into his room, hey, can you tell me the dream? These are the best in the world. They're the best minds in the world. Can you imagine all the best minds in the world together in one room, right? It's like the Einsteins, the Newtons, whoever else. Name a person who's smart, right? They're all together in this one room, and he's like, can you tell me? And every single one of them, no matter how smart they were, said, can't do it. Can't do it. No man can tell you the answer. And they are unable to answer his question. And I kind of find it a little bit funny that they answer him that way, because after all, this is kind of what their professions claim to do. I mean, we saw that he says they're astrologers, magicians, the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans were like the wise men. These are the roots, by the way. These guys right here that we're talking about, the Chaldeans, they are the roots of the wise men that come to the nativity to find Jesus later. They're watching the stars. They're trying to interpret what it means. These sorcerers, they would kind of roll the bones or they do their incantations to find out the future. And so these guys were supposed to know things that normal people don't know. So naturally, if he goes to them, he's like, okay, do your magic. Do that little thing, whatever it is you do, and tell me the answer. And yet none of them can tell them the answer. So I'm often asked, is it okay to go to fortune tellers and palm readers? And since we kind of getting into this a little bit, I thought I'd answer that question because it happens all the time. Because people come up to me and they say, well, I had this experience, or my auntie, or my uncle, or my brother, or my sister, and they told them something, and they knew stuff about them that no one else could know, they say to me. So what's the deal with that? Like, can we go listen to them? Can we talk to them? And the truth is, they might know some things, is the truth of the matter. First off, you know that you can train yourself to understand mind reading? I actually Googled it while I was doing my message just to see, and you can go online and find courses on how to do mind reading and do some of these tricks. And we've seen TV shows, and so some of it is simply tricks. Some of it is training ourselves to understand as we question people to find out more about them. So some of it is that. But I would tell you this. The second thing is some of it is that they're actually connected to something spiritual in this world. You see, but it's not God. A lot of times, there's a spiritual world around us. We all believe we have a soul. That means there is a spiritual realm. And there are other spirits in this realm, mostly fallen angels. There's God, there's angels, and then there's fallen angels. We call them demons. Satan, or Lucifer, is a fallen angel. And so some people are actually tapping in to these people, these fallen angels. And so that's why the Bible instructs us this. In Leviticus, it tells us, go ahead, do not defile yourselves by turning to mediums or to those who consult the spirits of the dead. I am the Lord your God, meaning don't let them be the ones that you begin to seek for help. Seek me. I'm the Lord. I'm the one who should reign over you. You see, the problem is we can go to those places, and you may even get some answers that may not be known to you or to other people. But what they're tapping into, even though it has a semblance of truth, always leads to a deception. You see, that's the biggest trick about a lie, is it has some truth to it. And so we're drawn to go to them. But God says, don't mix with other spirits because you don't want that connection in your life. And so maybe it is that they can tell you some things that you don't know. But do you want to be connected to those things? And God's saying, listen, just stay away from them and seek me. So these guys are trained in all these areas. He comes to his court. They're able to do all these things. But yet they all admit, we don't have the answer. There's no incantation I can give you. There's no star that I can look at that's going to tell you what your dream is. In fact, nobody will be able to do that. And they're saying, look, only the gods can do that. They believe in some form of higher power. They're gods, but they don't ever stoop to talk to you and me. Unlike the God of Israel who does. They're like, our gods are not going to tell us the answer, even if they have it. So Nebuchadnezzar surrounded himself with very wise people, but the problem is he surrounded himself with the wrong people. I don't know about you guys, but I've had dreams that have bothered me. Anyone here have a dream that's bothered you before? Yeah. This is one I think I told you guys not long ago, but when I was a waiter, I used to have this dream all the time. I would have a dream and I'd be waitering. And I'm on my shift and it's early in the evening and they sit with the restaurant's empty, but they sit at the table. And I come to my table, and I'm doing great. They love me. I'm talking with them, and I get their food, and I'm getting everything else. But as I'm about finished with getting everything they need, and I'm all set, ready for another table, they sit it, but then someone raises their hand and goes, I need a spoon. I'm like, okay, I'll get you a spoon. I walk to the back of the kitchen. I'm like, I need a spoon. There's no spoons. Like, aren't there any dishwasher? No, there's none. Hey, go see your new table. You better go. They're waiting for a while. So I go to that table. They sit at another table, and I still need the spoon. And I'm like, I can't find a spoon. There's not in the wait station. They're nowhere. And I wake up in a cold sweat. I can't find a spoon. Anybody ever have one of those crazy dreams, right? Our subconscious is speaking to us. It's like, John, you're a little bit nervous, I think, about this next shift, taking it, right? We have this thing because our subconscious is speaking to us. In this case, God is speaking to Nebuchadnezzar, and that's why he's having this disturbing dream. God wants to tell the king something. And these wise guys, these wise men will tell you the way of the world, but they don't know what God can tell you. You see, they want to see, they're trying to interpret things in the way of the world, but if God is trying to bring a message, the only place they're going to get that message is from God. But the good news is this. Jeremiah, who's a kind of contemporary of Daniel, he writes this: for the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God, as the scriptures say. He traps the wise in the snare of their own cleverness. So he's talking about the wisdom of this world can never answer the questions that God has in this world for you and me. And there are some questions that are important to us today that only God can answer. Certainly there are questions that the world can answer. I'm not saying that everything that we have to understand comes directly from God's lips, although ultimately they do in some way, shape, or form. But there are some questions that the world cannot answer for you. Why is this important for us today? because there are some questions that only God can provide in your life. And if we go to the wrong places, we're going to get the wrong answers. Big questions like this: why am I here? What happens when I die? The world can't answer those questions for you and me. How should I live in this world? Questions about purpose and meaning in our life, questions about relationship and marriage, the world cannot or can't sufficiently answer them. You see, God designed marriage, and so God knows how it works. And if we go to the world, we're only going to get so many answers. There's some good answers out there, but not some good enough. Only God can answer some of those questions for you and me. And so He's the one we have to go to. If we just wing it on some of these questions that are so important, that are fundamental of what life is all about, then we're going to just come up short, just like these guys did, just like Nebuchadnezzar did, just like, man, I don't really have an answer. And so God wants us to come to Him. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get an answer, and so he gets so frustrated with these guys. He's like, that's it. I'm going to kill all of you, and I'm going to turn your houses, another translation says, into a dunghill. You know what dung is? Poop, right? The dung beetle. He's like, I'm just going to waste it, because that's how angry I am. In fact, because they can't answer and they keep going back and forth, just give us the interpretation. Just tell us the dream. We'll tell you the interpretation. No, I'm not going to do it. In fact, he gives the decree, start killing them. And that's what happens. But lucky for them that God is going to intervene into this situation, and that's what happens next. Starts here. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? And then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are his companions that came with him, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven and concerning the secret. So Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever. So Daniel right now, he's just praising God in this moment. So he's blessed be the God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what's in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the king's demand. He's just like, God, you know everything. And this should be a testimony to us that if he knows everything, that he's the one that we need to go to. Therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. And Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king, but there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. So Daniel shows up. He gets word of this as they come to kill everybody else. He could have still been in the school. We're not sure yet if he has graduated, but they come to get rid of them all. And Daniel's like, hey, what's going on? And why is this so urgent? And the guy says, well, the king has decided this is what's going to happen. So Daniel says, let me pray about it. Let me find out. Let me seek God. And he does, and he gets an answer. So this is the second thing I'd like you to fill out is this. God will give you the answer if you ask him. God will give you the answer if you ask him. There's an interesting, confident tone to Daniel in this situation. I would think he'd be freaking out, like, what are we going to do? Guys, come here. Let's come up with a decision. Kind of like me and the flooding in the house, right? Like, what are we going to do? But instead, he's just like, hey, can I go see the king and just ask for some more time because I need to seek God? And so that's what he does. You know, too soon, we forget the miracles that God has done in our lives. God has been protecting Daniel, even though he's not in the place that he'd prefer to be maybe, but God has been watching over him. God's making him. When he prayed and said, look, just put us on vegetables and water, he's healthier than the other guys. In fact, God makes him wiser and smarter than everyone else. We read that last week in our message. By the way, if you can go to our YouTube channel, you can listen to it if you want. And so God already did some miracles in his life, and because he did, he's confident God's going to answer the question. You know, I always find it interesting when we look at the children of Israel, when they left Egypt, God did like 10 different plagues that were supernatural, that they were so great that the Egyptian Pharaoh, his astrologers, his magicians, all his people could not match the miracles that Moses did. So they conclude it has to be from God. So imagine these great miracles. He parts the Red Sea. Millions of people, 2 million people walk through it. They get to the other side, and like a day later, they're like, oh yeah, who is this God, and is God really with us? Think about that for a minute. God did all these works in your life. Don't you think God is still with you? This happens to me all the time. I come to these moments and I'm like, God, are you still with me? Like, God, are you still behind all this? And sometimes I just have to be reminded, God, John, haven't I been with you the whole way? Haven't I done these great things in your life? I'm still going to keep doing them. Sometimes you and I have to be reminded in those moments that God is still with us because we remember the things that he's done in our past. And so Daniel's like kind of confident, I think. He just walks up and says, yeah, give us some more time, and God's going to give us the answer. Daniel actually believed that God was going to give him that answer. As a student of the Bible, Daniel was, maybe he understood this verse. This is the contemporary writer, was Jeremiah, writing at the same time as Daniel. He may have read this because he'll read Jeremiah later. We're going to find this out. And this is what the Lord says, Daniel's reading from Jeremiah. He who made the earth, the Lord who formed it and established it, and the Lord is his name, the guy who created everything, the guy who formed the earth, the guy who made you says this, call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. God is saying, look, I know it all, I built it all, I even made you. If you want to know some things that are unsearchable that you can't find out, come to me. So Daniel's like, well, we got this promise, so I think he's going to do it. And the same promise is available to you and me, I want you to know. If you want to make better decisions in your life, ask God. That's what we need to do. When I was young, I heard that Solomon had prayed for wisdom and God gave it to him. And so even from a little child, I kept praying, God, please give me wisdom. God, please give me wisdom. He didn't give me as much as Solomon, okay? And I still pray it because I still need a lot more. But if we'll go to God first, God promises he will give us the answer. This is what the Bible also says. James, the brother of Jesus, writes this, if any of you needs wisdom, you should ask God and it will be given to you. God is generous and he won't correct you for asking. He won't be like, yeah, you should know the answer. Oh, come on, get out of here. No, I'm not going to give you the answer. You know, there is no silly, there's no dumb question with God. We've all heard people say that. There's no dumb question you can ask. And that's the way it is with God. God says, listen, if you want to know the answer, if you want wisdom, you come to me and I will give it to you. If you want to live a life making better decisions, then come to God. Prayer is one of those ways that we do it. That's how we make better decisions. But another way that we make better decisions is from the Bible, from understanding and knowing the Bible a little bit better. In fact, this is what the psalmist writes. Listen to what he says. Go ahead, put it up, the next verse. Your word, the Bible, your scriptures, is a lamp unto my feet. When it's dark and I don't know where to go, it's like a lamp and a light unto my path. When it's murky, when I'm not sure where to go, that's what your word is like for you, for me in life. The more we understand about the Bible, the better equipped we are because the Bible contains a lot of information about how to live life. And so that's one of the reasons that we do small groups. You see, we believe that your life is the sum total of the decisions that you make. Think about that for a moment. Every decision that you make basically makes up your whole life. If we can make better decisions in life, we'll have a better life, right? And so that's why we do small groups, because sometimes we don't all want to read the Bible. Some of you are like, yeah, I've heard that, but when am I going to read the Bible? I don't know if you even have time. Or maybe you say it's kind of boring, so I don't do it. I'm there. There are times where I haven't wanted to read the Bible. We do small groups so that it will encourage us to read the Bible together. Because anytime we do something in a group, it's going to encourage all of us to stay on track and provide that kind of accountability that we need. In fact, I went to school so I could learn because I probably wasn't going to learn on my own. And small groups are something like that. Small groups take place during the week. We have 2 of them that are starting in a couple weeks. And so we study a topic together in a group of other people. It lasts for about 10 weeks long. So you're going to make a commitment for about 2 months or 2.5 months to be with a group of other people and just study and understand the Bible a little bit better. And if you want to do that and get on a habit of reading and studying your Bible, then you can sign up in 2 ways. On the back of your connection card, just check off one of the boxes on the top right, or you can scan that flyer that is provided in your outline and you can sign up digitally. Either way. So you might want to think about it, go home, bring the flyer with you, scan it with your phone, that QR code, and you can sign up. So here's the deal. Daniel prays and he gets an answer. And now we're about to hear about it. Here it is up on the screen. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these, he's telling the king. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living. It's not because I'm smarter than anybody, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching. Now he's interpreting the dream. And behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image heads was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron. Its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. And then the iron and clay, the bronze and the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff for the summer wind, summer threshing floors. Chaff is like when you take the wheat, the husk off it, it becomes so light that when you throw it up in the air, it just blows it away. The wind does. And the wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. Then the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory, and wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold, but after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth, and a fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, the kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Wow, it's a long little section there, right? Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the dream that he had, and he just lets him keep going because he's like, yeah, that's right. And so he starts telling him what the interpretation was of it. He proceeds to tell him these things, and he says to the king, the reason for this dream is God's going to reveal to you what is going to happen in the future, in the latter days. And so he begins to describe this statue that represents history in totality, from the time of King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian kingdom all the way to the end of time. That's what he's describing. And so there is a huge statue, and if you look in your outline, it's going to help. There's a giant, as you flip through your notes, you're going to see a statue, and you're going to see some fill in the blanks. And let me tell you why this is so important for us to understand today. It's not important to your salvation. You can walk out of here never knowing this, and you're still a saved person, and you can know the Lord. But if you understand this today, this outline that we're studying, you are going to understand the Bible a little bit better. You're going to understand prophecy better, and you're going to understand the times that we live in a whole lot better. So I would love you to follow along and fill in these blanks. They may seem a little bit like we're going to class, but that's okay. You're going to learn a lot today. And so the first thing is this. Go ahead and put the image up. There's a head of gold. And he says to Nebuchadnezzar, this is you. This is the kingdom. So this top head of gold is Babylon. And Babylon's going to reign from 605 BC all the way to 539 BC. That's how long their kingdom stood. And the reason why he has the head of gold, and if you'll notice the descending order of these things, of these metals, is that one, the most precious metal, or the most costly, the most precious metal starts at the top. So we have the most costly is gold, then silver, then bronze, then iron, then clay, and iron together. But what you're going to see also is the reverse when it comes to power. Gold is not as strong as silver. Silver is not as strong as bronze. The Bronze Age came through with the Greeks. We're going to talk about that. And then the iron is going to destroy all of those things. It's more powerful. But why is the king gold? Babylon, king is gold. Because Nebuchadnezzar would probably be the most powerful king that ever walked this planet, in that it was a monarchy. And he had defeated much of the known world, but whatever decision he made, it stood. Like, he could decide to do whatever he wants, like he just did. You guys are all going to die, and your houses are going to be made into a dunghill, and no one can stop it. That's the kind of power he had. He could do whatever he wanted, and that's why his got the head of gold. And this is going to become a stumbling block for him later. We're going to talk about that. But what happens here is that in this time period right here is when the reign of the kings of Judah and Israel cease, and we enter into what's kind of a Gentile, or if you're non-Jewish, reign. And these are talking about world kingdoms. We're not talking about like France and Spain and the United States. We're talking about world kingdoms that took over other nations so that they spread very far. We're going to talk about that later in subsequent weeks, because this is not the only dream. Understanding this dream is to help us understand other dreams that Daniel himself is going to have. And so this is also the time where Israel becomes captive, taken away from their land for a period of time, so that these other kings are going to proliferate. And so what happens after that, he says, then there's the chest and arms of silver. Go ahead to the next slide. And that's going to become the Medo-Persian Empire. And so the Medes and the Persians kind of band together, and then they take over the Babylonian kingdom. And the time they reign is about 539 to 330 BC. And this takeover is going to take place while Daniel is still alive. Daniel lives into his 80s or so, and so we're going to see that in Daniel chapter, I believe it's Daniel chapter 6 or 7. We're going to see this takeover actually happen during his lifetime. And it's silver and not gold, because they lived under what was called a constitutional monarchy. The king could not just arbitrarily do whatever he wanted. He couldn't change the laws. You see, the king of Babylon could change them at a snap of his finger. But the king of the Medo-Persian Empire could not. If you remember, if you were here with us for 2 years ago, we did the Book of Esther. And the Book of Esther takes place during this time where Artaxerxes is reigning. And Artaxerxes makes a decree to destroy Israel. And then Esther, who is a Jew, says, oh, please don't destroy my people. And he says, well, I can't take away that decree. I made it. The only way I can do it is make up another one, maybe to help counteract it, because I can't take it away. He didn't have that power. And that's why he had less power than the king of Babylon, which is Nebuchadnezzar. And so he also had to have it approved and get it to change. So he couldn't do that himself. And while this happens, Daniel is still in Babylon during this time period. But also, God will use this time period, because the temple in Jerusalem gets destroyed and leveled, and there is no temple any longer. But through this, Artaxerxes is going to make a decree that they can go back to the land in the time of Nehemiah and the time of Ezra to rebuild the temple and the walls of Jerusalem. And this is going to become very important in chapter 9. We'll talk about that again later. But so he uses this time, this king, to return the people back to the land. And then we have the belly of bronze and the thighs of bronze. And that represents the Greece or the Grecian kingdom. And they reigned basically from 31 BC to 63 BC. And so Alexander the Great, inheriting a partial kingdom from his father Philip, was an incredible strategist, incredible warrior. And they also had these techniques that were so good in war, where they band all their shields together. If you ever saw the movie Troy, right, and they're like advancing, right, they made it almost impossible to break through. They knew strategies so well that they were able to take over the known world at that time, defeat the Medes and the Persians, and take over even more land. And yet, what happens in him with Alexander the Great, this incredible guy, by the time he is 32, he's taken over basically the known world. And he gets drunk one night at a party, and he starts crying because he's like, there are no more worlds to conquer. He's so upset. Like, this guy gets upset. But also at a party, he gets sick one night. He gets the flu, and he ends up dying of the flu. So he's on his deathbed, and they're like, well, what should we do with the kingdom? You haven't married anyone. You're too young. You know, all you cared about is war. You've got no one to pass it on to. Who should get the kingdom? And Alexander the Great says, give it to the strong. And so what happens is 4 of his generals rise up to take power and separate the known kingdom into 4 different quadrants. And so 2 of them become very large. The Seleucid kingdom and the Ptolemy kingdom become the largest and really take over. But because of this, there's less power. Even though he himself had tons of power, the kingdom becomes divided. And that's why they're bronze, because they're not as individually have as much power, but as a kingdom they had more power. And so this happens. And what interestingly happens during this time is one of the things, each kingdom had a different way of subjugating the people to try to turn them and keep the control of the known world. Imagine you have limited troops, you're trying to control the world. What do? So the Greek would often try to take away your culture and infuse their culture into your culture so that you would become more like them and forget that you have a sense of national identity. And so they trained everyone basically to speak Greek. And in that time, everyone, almost the known world, begins to speak Greek. So at the time of Jesus Christ, they spoke what was called Koine Greek. A common language of Greek was one of the languages that they spoke. And what's so important about this is God used the Grecian kingdom to get everybody speaking the same language so that when the gospel goes out, it can be more easily communicated to the whole world. Think about that. God's still working through these kingdoms for his purpose for the sake of the gospel. So then there was the next kingdom to come, and that's the legs of iron, and that's Rome. And Rome basically reigned about 63 BC to about 475 or 76 AD after the time of Christ. And that would be more, the kingdom gets divided, as some of you may know, in Rome. This is the western portion of Rome, but then Constantinople also becomes the capital. And that reigns for almost another 1,000 years, just so you know. But the most of the power came then. And Rome was probably the largest, took over most of the world than all of them, first off, most territory. But also they were the most powerful. I mean, there was this term called Roman peace, Pax Romana. That's what it was called. Pax Romana was the term, and it meant Roman peace. And the way they kept peace was, we beat you to death until you submit. That's what they did. So they just sent their forces in there, and they would just subjugate you. Like, if you're trying to, rebel, forget about it. It was not going to be pretty. And that's how they kept peace. Some people keep that kind of peace in their home. I don't know who you are, but you're like, that's it. Just going to teach you guys a lesson. And that's the way they did. And not only that, but to get their troops to the places they need to get them, they built roads all over the world. Everybody's probably heard the term, all roads lead to Rome. And that's because of what they did. Not only were they great warriors and great at war, but they also were great at building and architecture. And so they built these roads and basically paved the way for the gospel to go all over the world, because now it was easier for people to travel from one place to another. And so God, again, using this kingdom for his purposes and for his gospel. And so then there's the feet of iron and clay. And this last part represents 2 things. The mix of iron and clay is this confederation of kings that's going to come, but this is the last world government. And we potentially are in that last world government, meaning that there's not going to be one single nation again that takes over the world, but it will be a conglomeration or a united group of nations together that will do this. And later we're going to see this points to these 10 kings, basically. And he mentions specifically these toes, which there are 10 toes. If you read in the book of Revelation, that's the book at the end of the whole Bible that talks about the end times. It says this. Go to that verse for a minute, please. And then the 10 horns of the beast are the 10 kings, the beast being the Antichrist or that last world power, who have not yet risen to power. They will be appointed to their kingdoms for one brief moment to reign with the beast. So this kingdom won't last a whole lot of time, but it will be at the end times. And again, we could possibly be living in those and see this in our lifetime today. And so this is a kingdom that will rise basically because Rome was never fully defeated. It just kind of dissipated into all these kingdoms. And there will be this conglomeration that comes again in the end times. We'll talk more about that at another time. But then finally, he sees this rock that is cut without human hands that comes and crashes into this statue and destroys it. And that, go to the next slide, this rock then grows into a mountain that covers the whole earth. And this rock and this mountain is the symbol or the signaling of the return of Christ and the final kingdom that lasts. It spans the whole earth. And the other kingdoms disappear and have gone away. They're not going to be found any longer. You see, God is going to return. He's going to reign and rule on this earth. And this is symbolic of that. That's the picture, by the way, for our series is a giant mountain. Is representative that God is going to rule and reign over this whole earth. Christ will do that. And so for some of us, we might go, isn't that kind of crazy? I mean, to think about that Christ is going to come back. Because if we kind of follow science, I don't see how that's going to happen. Does the world just keep going on and on? A lot of us wonder what's going to happen in the future. According to the Bible, God returns. Jesus returns, and he takes over the whole earth, basically. And there'll be no more rule of men. That's why it gets crushed, and it's disappeared, because there's not going to be any more kingdoms that are ruled by men. We are going to be ruled by Christ. And this dream is the key to all the visions of Daniel. It's the key to Revelation. And so that's why I purposely had you write these things down. Not that you're going to remember it all, but it will become a little bit of a reference for you for understanding these 5 kingdoms. And these 5 kingdoms are very important. And so today, if you're thinking this is so crazy, I'm not sure if I believe it, then probably this last point is going to be important for you. We're going to finish up here. There's one last section of the chapter, and it says this. Inasmuch as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly, your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also, Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. What it means to sit in the gate, if you sat in the gate, means you were a ruler, you were a judge. And so Daniel was a ruler over the capital of all of the kingdom of Babylon. And he appoints Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be rulers also in different provinces. This is something that you'd like to know, I think, is your last point. You should choose whether God's answer makes you or breaks you. You choose whether God's answer makes you or breaks you. Daniel says the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. This is it. This is what it means. And so when God gives an answer, I want you guys to know this, and you probably already know it, it's always right. Do you believe that today? When God gives an answer, it is always right. He doesn't play practical jokes. He's not going to tell you something that's not true. He's going to tell you what's right. And nothing is going to change that. The answer that he gives you is going to be the right one. It's going to be the right path. It's going to be the right way to respond. It's going to be the answer that you're looking for. It's going to be the right thing that you need to hear in that moment, because that's what God does. But we have to decide whether we're going to take the answer. Just because he gives it to you doesn't mean you're going to take it. Nebuchadnezzar, after he hears it, he bows down. He starts worshiping Daniel. He's worshiping him. He's your God is amazing. This is the truth. You interpreted the dream. I can't believe it. He's doing all this stuff. But here's something about Nebuchadnezzar that we don't understand in this moment, is that he's not going to accept it. I'm going to acknowledge it's true, but we're going to turn the page. We're going to turn the page just one page later, and we're going to find out that this guy doesn't really want to accept it at all. He's I can acknowledge it, but I'm not going to accept it. And each and every one of us, we can acknowledge it, but we're not going to accept it. We have the choice whether we accept it or not, whether we're going to put it into practice or not put it into practice. Next chapter, and the next 2 chapters actually, he's going to be no. My kingdom is not going to end. Not only that, my kingdom's not going to end. Man, I don't want to accept that God's in control. He's going to fight this truth in his life tooth and nail until God has to break the man. And we're going to find that out. Because he's I understand it's truth, but I don't want it. And each and every one of us, when we get an answer from God, that's our choice. Our choice is, am I going to do what you say, God, because now you've told me the truth, or am I not going to do what you say? Just as the rock is cut without human hands, the kingdom of Christ hits the statue, and all kingdoms are going to submit to him, or the ones that don't submit to him are going to be crushed. It's like this picture. You think you're going to rule? Well, here's what's going to happen. Just disappears into nothing. And every kingdom that you and I have, every area of our life that we say we're not going to submit to God is going to end up being crushed. Jesus has this confrontation with the Pharisees, and the Pharisees are like not believing in him. Even though he's doing these incredible miracles, all these other people are following after him thinking, is this the Son of God? Is this the Messiah? They're all asking this question. Many of them are believing it, but they won't believe it. And so Jesus says something interesting to them. He quotes the scripture verse, while he says it, he says, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Listen to this. Whoever falls on the stone will be broken. Like if you decide you're going to listen, if you're going to submit, you're going to be broken, humbled, but you're going to be great. But he says, but on whomever it falls, it will grind him to powder. Doesn't this like remind you of something? This vision that we just saw, this rock that comes in. He says, look at it. Either you're going to submit and it's going to go well for you, or it's not and it's going to go really bad for you. In fact, the next line, they get so mad at him because they realize that he spoke this against them. That's what it said. And they get really mad at Jesus in this moment. The same is true for you and me. We're going to either accept the truth and take it and do something with it, or we're going to be turning it away. See, we can ignore it. You can fight it. You can push it aside. But it'll only cause you in the end to be crushed by it. And God is saying to you and me, listen, there's truth that I'm giving you. And if you'll use it in your life is going to go well for you. So many of us here can testify to that and say, yes, I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen so many times you wouldn't believe. I've been learning this lesson. I don't know if it's my wife, the Holy Spirit, or God, but when these little things come into my life that seem to be disrupting everything, I just stop and say, you know what, God, I know you're going to take care of it. This week we made a mistake. We forgot to enroll our son Woody in the school with his sisters. They go to a charter school, and the time had passed. And by the time we turned it in, they said to us, I'm sorry, it's late. You missed the deadline. He's on the waiting list. And we're like, oh my God. And I'm thinking inside, how could we have missed this? Like we knew, because once he's in Oasis. Once we get him in there, he's set all the way through high school. We don't have to worry. We don't have to make a care in the world. And I'm like, oh my God, and his sisters are going to that. And he might go to a different school. And my wife is concerned. We're sweating it. And so we stop, we pray. And inside, I'm like, you know what? God, you're either going to take care of it or not take care of it. Either way, I don't care. I trust you. Like, this happened like on a Monday this week or Tuesday. My wife came to me yesterday. She's all excited. She goes, John, the lady called us even though he was like 8th on the waiting list. I don't know how this happened in 4 days, but Woody is in the school. I just got an email. And it's like I've been learning to go, you know what, God? I'm not going to get crazy over this. I'm just going to trust you because your way is always right. This is an interesting story. You may find it a little humorous, but I worked for a boss for 20 years. It was a job that I had while I was a pastor, and so it was full-time at one point, then part-time, but I worked this job forever. And the boss and I had a great relationship. And we would come in, when we do a coffee break, we'd sit and talk about God, because he was a Christian. He went to church. He was actually an elder at another church. So we'd always talk about theology and just encourage one another. And he said one day, he comes in, he's kind of depressed. He's like, John, I just wish God would use me more, and I just don't feel like I'm doing the right things. And I said, well, let's pray about it. So we prayed that day at the coffee break. And so then I work out in the shop, but he's in the office, and that's separate. So I'm out there all day, and then when I come for lunch, we usually sit and eat lunch together too. And I'm talking to him, and he goes, John, you're not going to believe this. Strangest thing happened to me. I'm sitting at my desk, my head's down. I don't know what happened to the secretary, but when I look up, there's a man standing in front of me. And he has a sign that he's holding, and he looks homeless, and he says, he goes, I'm deaf. Can you please give me, or I need assistance? And I said, well, what did you do? And he goes, I got up and I escorted him out the door. And I'm like, excuse me? We just prayed about this. You just prayed about something to happen. God sends you an angel? And I started joking with him, God sends you an angel and you just ignored it? And he's like, oh, well, I don't know. And he's just like, I'm like, I can't believe that just happened. God gave you an answer, but you didn't take the answer. Now, that wasn't a big deal maybe because, I'm sure there's more homeless people, but I'm thinking God just answered your question and you didn't do anything. Let me tell you another story, though. When I was pastor at the other church for 19 years. There's a woman who'd been coming for 8 long years. And she had served diligently. She came, she was a tither, she was there every Sunday, she served in the children's ministry, and she would always kind of make appointments with me to talk about something, like for counseling, but never go through with it. This week, I'm going to make, no, and she would try to say no. And the thing is, I can understand why she didn't, because she'd been living with her boyfriend for over 10 years. So she's in this situation, and she finally meets with me, and she tells me this, because that's why it's been hard for me to meet with you, because I just didn't feel right about what I'm doing, and this relationship is not progressing, and I really want to be married, but I also want him to be a Christian, and so she didn't know what to do. And so she'd been growing so much, and I'm like, well, she goes, what should I do? Should I move out? And so I kind of encouraged her, and as a counselor, you got to tell some people some things that are hard to hear, right? And so I'm like, I told her what the Bible talked about. I kind of instructed her, and I said, yeah, I think you should move out. And I said, I know this is not going to be easy, but I want you to know that God's way is always right. God's way is always the best way. And so we prayed for her. I prayed for her, and she went home, and she decided she was going to move out, and she did. And then a few weeks later, I think it was like less than a month or so, she shows back up and she goes, John, you're not going to believe what happened. You're not going to believe what happened. He came to me and he started talking to me and he wanted to know more about my faith. She shows me a ring. We're engaged right now. And this guy becomes one of the most radical Christians I ever knew. And I'm like, God can do the impossible in our lives. You see, we sometimes get the answer and we're just like, I don't want that answer. Because we think it's going to lead to the wrong way. She was afraid she was going to lose him. That was her fear. I don't know if I can do this. I think he's going to leave, and I love him, and I want to stay with him. But she did the hard thing. She got the answer from God, and she decided to do it. And when she did, God came through, because God's answer is always the right answer for you and me. Some of us, we hear an answer from God, but we just go, we talk ourselves out of it. We strategize. Maybe we find another verse in the Bible that says something opposite so we can go, well, I see God, you say this, so I don't know if that's really the answer. But sometimes we know the answer and we just have to live it out in our lives. And if we will do that, God can do some wonderful things in your life. When God gives you the answer, we have to decide what we're going to do with it. God's answer will always be the best path. He's always right. He always does the best. But we have to do it even when it's hard. I prayed for every one of my children when they were in the womb. And I would say it every time almost. I would pray the same prayer. And for my daughter Gwendolyn, my prayer was, God, give her the strength to do what's right, even when it's hard. God, my wife came up to me later and said, you're the one who made her stubborn. But if she does the right thing, I don't care. If she's going to follow God, it's the right thing. You see, we don't get to decide the future is the truth. God decides our future. But we get to decide how we're going to live it. And when we follow him, you're going to have the life that you really want. Let's pray. God, there's someone in here right now who's struggling with this. Because your way isn't always the easiest way, but it is always the best way. So God, I pray that this truth penetrates our hearts, that we would understand it. Because God, I think all of us, I would rather be broken on the rock than be broken by the rock, Lord. God, reach your hand out in my direction today. God, pour your mercy and your grace upon me so that we, God, can live the life that you have for us, not the life that we have for us. I believe your way is better, God. Help me always in every decision to have the strength to make the right choice, even when it's hard. Thank you for hearing my prayer today. Listen, with all of us with our head bowed for a moment in an attitude of prayer, I just want you to know that the Bible is written the way it is so that we would understand God better. God didn't put us on this planet and just walk away and say, live it the way you want. God says, look, I'm going to give you a guide, and it's going to tell you about me, and my love for you. That's a God who loves us. That's a God who cares. And when we read what's in his word, if we will apply it to our lives, God's going to do some great things. And God said this, I put my son on this earth, and I sacrificed him for you, for your sake, to make up for everything that you've done wrong. He's going to live the life you can't. He's going to be perfect in every single way, but he's going to die. I'm going to sacrifice him for you, and you're going to change places, is what he says. Because I love you, and I want to spend that eternal kingdom with you. That eternal kingdom that's going to take over this whole world, I want you to be a part of it, and I want to live with you. I'm going to live on the earth with you. And the way we access that is simply by asking the forgiveness of our sins and trusting that Jesus has paid for them on the cross. And when we do that, when we invite Jesus into our heart, we ask him to forgive us. God says, I take your righteousness and I give you the righteousness of Christ, the perfect righteousness that can then enter my kingdom. And if that's you today and you want to spend that eternity with him because, as Daniel said, the interpretation is true and sure, then all you got to do is say a simple prayer and invite him into your heart. And so I want to lead you in that prayer right now. In fact, I'm going to ask every one of us to pray it out loud right now. Dear God, I invite you inside to be my God, my Savior, and my friend. Forgive me of my sins. Wash me clean. I've decided today to follow you, Jesus. From this day forever, I'm yours. In Jesus' name I pray.